So John, you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay. Well, welcome to the Norfolk Historical Society's evening. I'm Jon Stull. I'm presenting, I guess I could say, from 3 Ton Tavern down here in Great Bridge. It's the eve of the battle, and I'm so happy that you've invited me to join you yet again. I know I've been before you before to talk about the Battle of Great Bridge, but it is my honor this time on the 246th anniversary of the battle, the eve of the battle tonight, is to perhaps take a look at some different perspectives. What I'd like to take a look at before we talked about all the events that led up and that were instrumental in coming to the Battle of Great Bridge. But what I'd like to look at tonight is discuss why Lord Dunmore made such a fateful decision, with the impact of what he felt would be just a tactical decision ended up being a strategic blunder. Through the modern manufacturing of these amazing sets before me, we'll be able to do this virtually. Although I'm sure you would like to join me here at the 3 Ton Tavern. What I'll do in just a moment is to go to the graphics. Apparently the magic lantern will put up graphics and I'll be able to create the presentation for you. But I see now that
I'm on my phone. I don't know what happened.
I already started, Peggy, so you can let me roll, or I don't know if you wanted to.
Roll.
All right, I'm rolling then. Very good. Well, if I press the right buttons, I'll get to where I need to be. All right.
Okay, and I'll jump in the end.
Very good.
Doing good.
Well, everyone, you should be seeing your invitation, a graphic of your invitation on the eve of battle, because here we are. Although the details of the 8th of December, 246 years ago, have not been widely documented in detail, we can just imagine how that evening and night and the following day went. It would be a fateful decision, one that would result in the mauling of the most effective ground force Lord Dunmore had, the turning of the colony against him, forcing him to withdraw back to Norfolk, and then ultimately in the summer of '76, leaving Virginia forever. How did this take place? I see this taking place aboard a ship, either Captain Squire's Otter or aboard the Eelbeck, the merchant vessel of Lord Dunmore that he was using as his headquarters while he was governing the colony from aboard ship. Both of these ships are possible. We don't have a definitive identity on where it would happen, but certainly a wardroom, for those of you who have served in the Navy, is an appropriate place to be discussing tactics and to come to decisions of great import. And so I can just imagine how this took place. The governor would have met with his senior military officers, Captain Squire, the master of the Otter, and additionally, Captain Samuel Leslie, who is the commander of the 14th Regiment of Foot, the detachment that had been sent up from St. Augustine. He arrived in July, and the company of 60 light infantry had been working for Dunmore for some time. Probably Captain Charles Fordyce would have also joined. Fordyce had just joined the Grenadiers at the end of October, but he was junior to Captain Leslie, so he would have been quiet and sat in the corner. He was the commander of 60 Grenadiers up from St. Augustine, Florida. They just arrived, like I said, at the end of October and had just experienced their first engagement with the rebels at Kemp's Landing in the middle of November. It is likely that Lord Dunmore asked for their assessment of the situation. Captain Squire was likely to express his opinion that the rebels needed to be taught a lesson, especially after the impudence they demonstrated at the end of October when he attempted to recover the tender and auxiliary craft that had been washed ashore by the great storm in September. He was driven off by the locals and by their sharpshooters, keeping him from manning his guns on his own ship. And then Captain Fordyce, if present, certainly would have deferred to Captain Leslie, the senior of the two. Captain Leslie, being an experienced officer with 27 years commissioned service, was likely cautious but confident in offering his advice. Some have said when Lord Dunmore suggested that they should attack as rapidly as possible, that he was politely countered by the military, pointing out that the rebels would be at a disadvantage if they attacked Fort Murray. And if the regulars stayed in Fort Murray, let the rebels come to them. They had just constructed the fort at Great Bridge, and this would give them a tremendous advantage over the attackers. Again, the rules of combat rarely will hold true still today, but remember that defense is favored by at least 2 to 1. So it would be the onus being placed on the rebels from their point of view would have been the preferred action. So why not wait for the rebels to attack? That seems to be the question for many. All present were aware that the North Carolinians might, with their cannon, were expected to reinforce the Virginians at Great Bridge. And that could take place any day now. It had been anticipated for about a month, hence the construction of the fort and the foray out to Kemp's Landing to ensure additional rebel recruiting was not being developed. But Dunmore had gained some precious intelligence. A house servant of Thomas Marshall, one of the Culpeper Minutemen, had deserted, quote unquote, and relayed to Dunmore that there were only 300 shirtmen at the bridge and no cannon. And this also tells Dunmore if it's shirtmen, they're hunters and they use rifles, which are much slower in trying to get repeated shots out. So you would be at a disadvantage if all you had were riflemen, and certainly at a disadvantage if there were no cannon. But how long would that last? Time was of the essence, so he felt that they must act quickly before Colonel Woodford's main force arrived and before the North Carolinians with their cannon arrived. A fort might be adequate protection against a musket ball, but it would not stand up against cannon shot. So I can imagine after high tea in the afternoon aboard the Otter that both Captains Leslie and Fordyce departed with some urgency, for they were to take their regulars with 2 cannon, conduct a night march to the Great Bridge, and then attack in the morning. Even for some of the best trained troops, that was a tall order. But what about the Patriots? The 2nd Virginia, reinforced with 5 companies of the Culpeper Minutemen, were under the command of William Woodford, and they were in Great Bridge. What was Woodford thinking that night? Did he anticipate such an attack? There was no wardroom battle discussion. He basically thought it prudent to hold tight to the position that he had. The militia had been gathering in the village of Great Bridge since the regulars had built Fort Murray on the north side of the southern branch of the Elizabeth River in the middle of November. Lieutenant Colonel Charles Scott, Woodford's second in command, had arrived in Great Bridge on November 28th with an advance party of a couple hundred riflemen and had begun to fortify the early attempts to block the Great Road to North Carolina and create defensive works. Since his arrival, infrequent engagements with the regulars had taken place, each side feeling the other out for their strengths and their weaknesses. After halting for supplies in Suffolk for a few days, Colonel Woodford and the main body arrived at Great Bridge on the 2nd of December. They had been in village a week. He was still seeking more powder, blankets, and hopefully the cannon he heard would be coming up from North Carolina. His total force was close to 900 troops. Woodford felt that he would grow stronger with time and that there was no hurry to attack until he had what he needed, especially the cannon. He was a cautious and methodical officer who did not want to put his troops at risk unnecessarily. He had learned under George Washington when he was one of his ensigns of the Provisional Virginia Brigade during the French and Indian War. However, he was under great pressure from the Committee of Safety and the 4th Virginia Convention to press past the fort and put pressure on Lord Dunmore to leave Norfolk. He continued to resist, or at least to be slow. Just as Dunmore had asked his officers for their assessment, and likely Woodford had done the same, we should do likewise. Both sides would have assessed what the recent events had been. Since the second convention, when Patrick Henry gave his stirring yet confrontational speech of "Give me liberty or give me death," tensions had increased. It became so tense that after the second magazine incident in Williamsburg, Lord Dunmore felt that he had to leave the capital and try to govern aboard ship. He was the second governor to do so, having been preceded by Josiah Martin of North Carolina. He would not be the last. Dunmore survived the confrontation, but remained aboard ship. With very few land forces, he was buoyed by the first deployment of 60 light infantry of the 14th Regiment of Foot, arrived at the end of July, and immediately started to conduct raids against the rebels and successfully secured muskets and cannon from suspected individuals. Then came the furious fall of 75, which I spoke to you last when we met. A major hurricane had struck Hampton Roads the first week of September, which sent many auxiliary and tenders ashore, damaged the wharf, created a great deal of damage here in Hampton Roads. Not as much as Newbern, but still a very strong storm. Citizens, it turns out, decided to recover what had been washed ashore, even if it did belong to the Royal Navy. Of course, Captain Squire had a bit to say about that and wanted to regain those materials. And even though in their attempt to try to get this material, the local press sided with the rebels or the Patriot cause and gave much criticism to both Dunmore and Captain Squire. Consequently, Dunmore sent his Marines ashore to seize John Hunter Holt's Virginia Gazette, the first newspaper for Norfolk, and bring it aboard the Eelbeck, so the correct information could be published. Sound familiar? Captain Squire is frustrated in his raid against Hampton at the end of October as he tries to recover that. And the governor, learning of Woodford's force had crossed the James, built a fort at Great Bridge to control the only land route to Norfolk. Dunmore declares martial law at Kemp's Landing, signing on 3,000 oaths of loyalty and raising 2 provisional regiments of a few hundred. The Crown now has approximately 650 troops, 120 of them regulars, now available to break the defense of the rebels at Great Bridge. But along the way, other events are happening that makes colonists feel that the Crown did not have their best interest at heart. Within a month of Patrick Henry's stirring speech, what happens? In his speech, he says, the next gale from the north, when it comes. Well, when it comes, it came April 19th at Lexington and Concord. Of course, the express rider took approximately a week to get down to this area, but that was a significant bit of news. And of course, it's coupled because 2 days with events that 2 days later, Governor Dunmore has his Marines raid the magazine and relieve it of 16 half casks of black powder. He insisted for the protection of the colony, but it did seem peculiar that he would do this in the dark of night. After Holt's Press is seized by Dunmore, the Third Virginia Convention had had enough, and they order Colonel William Woodford to take his 2nd Virginias reinforced to march on Norfolk to drive Dunmore out of Norfolk. And after building the fort to stop Woodford's force, he marches to Kemp's Landing, publishes his proclamation in which he would arm the indentured servants and the enslaved of rebels and give them their liberty after serving the crown. This would be the spark that truly spread the flame of revolution. The plan for the British was relatively simple. Get all the regulars you can, conduct a night march, and get to Great Bridge as soon as possible. Your plan is to attack at dawn. But before you attack, take 2 companies of the Ethiopian Regiment. And these are enslaved African Americans that had sworn allegiance to the crown and now were a military unit. Very poorly equipped, and certainly did not have much time to train in the two to 3 weeks they'd been in service. But this was an attempt to take them, 2 companies, and to have them go march, we believe, to the west and cross the river further downstream on the western flank, and then in crossing come in behind the Patriots. So thus it would drive the Patriots to be concerned with somebody marching on their rear, and at that time the attack would take place. It sounds like an interesting plan. However, untrained troops in the middle of the night on a march that's probably another 8 miles through the swamp, it's difficult to do it even if they're trained troops. And the other part of this is remember the precedent. Remember the lead troops in this will be the Grenadiers. And the Grenadiers had just come into theater. They were experienced. The 14th Regiment itself has been in North America since 1768. And they had been on various different deployments. But they had come up from St. Augustine, and this was their first time in what we call the Hampton Roads. Their first action was at Kemp's Landing. And at Kemp's Landing, they were ambushed by the Patriots, and the Grenadiers lowered their bayonets and charged the ambush, and the Patriots fled into the swamp. Several were killed, quite a number were captured, to include the ringleaders. So this is the impression that the Grenadiers have of what they'll expect when they face the rebels again. So at dawn of the battle, all the regulars have made it. They made it to the fort, which is up here with the upside down A. I've taken the previous map and oriented it with north at the top. So the box that is up there, let's see if I can use one of these tools. Let's see, annotate. Forgive me, this is the well beyond an 18th century person's ability, but we'll give it a shot. But this fort here, if you can see me putting the arrow to it, the regulars had marched from the north down to the fort. The fort had been occupied by only a few regulars. Of course, the southern branch of the Elizabeth River is in that position, and the Great Bridge is here. The Patriots then are south. I'll refer to them now as Patriots, since I tend to side on that and not the rebel side. But the British certainly thought they were anything but Patriots. And their positions were primarily all the way back beyond a quarter of a mile. They had set up a bivouac back by where there's a parish church. If you're to come to the village It's a great bridge now. That's where BB&T is. I'm not too sure if that denotes progress, but that's where they had camped out because it was the high ground. During the course of the evening, they put a duty company down here at the breastworks. The breastworks were always manned, and it prevented the British from going to the south. At night, they'd send out scouts to be out here on South Island to see what would happen if the British came out of the fort. So that was the situation at dawn. What happens after a few opening rounds of musketry, letting each side know that they're there, the grenadiers come out in formation and they start to march across the bridge. They secure the other side of the bridge and establish a position where the two 4-pound cannon can be placed approximately in that position. So they can fire directly on to the breastworks while the troops take the causeway in a curve to the east. That's their plan. It's not a bad plan, but it does run into problems. Once the British are on the causeway, they are 6 abreast and 10 deep because of the size of the causeway. They can't fan out in large flanks as they'd like to. This creates a dense target and ones that the Patriots are looking forward to exploit. Once that takes place, then the engagement, let's see, where am I? Okay. There we go. The engagement takes place and the muskets open up. The duty company opens up on the 14th, the Grenadiers of the 14th Regiment of Foot. Despite the cannon coming from South Island and playing down the length of the village to keep it from being reinforced, they are initially stopped, but they try to reform. They are backed by yet another company of the 14th Regiment, this being light infantry. But in the meantime, before they can conduct their next attack, the Culpeper Minutemen, who are bivouacked back by the chapel, hear that this is no ordinary day. And so they grab their rifles and they run to their positions on the flank where the Patriots had hoped they'd place cannon. But without with the cannon not being there, this creates an ideal situation for the Patriots. The muskets have an effective range of 50 to 75 yards, so they can engage straight away. Riflemen can engage at 200 to 300 yards. And so now we have the British caught in a crossfire. Despite the valor of the day, there's great loss on the British side. 60 of the regular force of 120 are killed, captured, or wounded. So half of the force has been decimated by this attempt to break the Patriot defense. Let's see. I'm trying, oh, there we go. Okay. Don't know when that mouse works or not. What happens in the course of that? Well, at the end of that morning attack, and it only took 30 minutes, there's a quiet in the town. There's the groaning and the cries of the wounded, but the locals pull them into the ordinaries and the taverns and try to dress their wounds as best they can. There's an exchange of prisoners and the wounded, and then both sides sit tight. The Patriots stay on their side of the breastwork, and the British retreat to the fort. There's great apprehension of what would come next. There was some speculation that there was Highlanders and that they would come down from Norfolk. But under cover of night, Captain Samuel Leslie withdraws the ambulatory and the fit forces back to Norfolk. This is unknown by the Patriots. And the next morning, They proceed over the bridge with caution, and they realize that the fort is empty. They do see evidence that there was great bloodshed in the fort and across the bridge. As I said, Colonel Woodford was a cautious commander. He still waits for reinforcements, and the next day, reinforcements do come. The North Carolinians come up, and they do have cannon, but the cannon they have are so badly pitted that they would not have been effective in battle. But at least it would look like they had cannon. With the two combined forces of the Virginians and the North Carolinians, they march on to Norfolk. When they get there, they start to occupy Norfolk on December 14th and 15th. Of course, most of Norfolk is a Tory-oriented town. They're loyal to the king, and they find their protection with him. So they get aboard the ships, as many as they can, or get on small vessels and get underneath the Royal Navy ships for the protection. They fear what the rebels might do if they come upon them in town. Lord Dunmore requests to send parties ashore for replenishment of supplies and to get water, but that's denied. Now it's both Colonel Woodford and Colonel Howe. Robert Howe is a Continental officer from North Carolina. He's the senior of the two gentlemen, so he has command, but they agree that they'll be co-commanders. They check with the Committee of Safety, and the Committee of Safety says, do not allow Dunmore to get reinforced, to get replenishment ashore. So they deny it. They're given an ultimatum at the end of the month, and of course, you're aware of this history that still denied them. So on the 1st of January, 1776, Lord Dunmore sends parties ashore to raid and to take provisions, and in the process sets some fires and bombards the town for 10 hours with cannon that he has, of the warships that he does have under his control. Much of Norfolk burns for about 2 to 3 days. So much so that Lord Dunmore decides to pull off, and he lays off and is at around Tucker's Point, Hospital Point area now. And he stays there, but he has now left Norfolk. What's of interesting note is that fire in Norfolk, upon further investigation of records 70 years later, turns out that you could attribute probably 90% of the fire and destruction to the Patriot cause. But it had done its work. It would end up being in our Declaration of Independence, with the litany of things that we wanted to make known to the world. And one of them was, you burn our cities. And this, along with following mass, was what was being considered at the time. So that's the story of the battle. And you know some of the things that went into perhaps why they made these decisions. The element of time is essential, both for Woodford, because his superiors want him to move before Dunmore can be reinforced. And then also for Dunmore, he wants to break that breastwork, that defense works, before North Carolinians come and reinforce Woodford. So they both have a very similar problem. The epilogue on this, and we won't go through all the revolution because we certainly don't have time for that. But the epilogue on this is that these gentlemen continued to serve. Of course, Lord Dunmore will have a longer and more illustrious career. From here, he attempts to regather or recruit a force. He goes to Gwynn's Island and it's finally driven off Gwynn's Island in July of 76. Still wants to recruit a force to come back and retake Norfolk and Virginia. This never happens, despite his many attempts. And then after the war, he is sent down to be governor of the Bahamas. So he ends up being a governor yet again, but of the Bahamas, and holds that post for a number of years before going back going back to England and to his home in Scotland. He outlives most of his contemporaries at this battle. He dies at the age of 78 in his home in Scotland. Samuel Leslie, less is known of him. He does serve with Dunmore, we believe, until he departs for England, and he departs for England in August of 77. He retires at the age of 51 after 31 years of service with His Majesty's service. Now, William Woodford, on the other hand, it's a bit more tragic, and I'll touch on him later on his demise, but he does serve throughout the Revolution. After this, and because of his service here, he then in February of 77 is promoted to Brigadier General and serves and is wounded at Brandywine, and then also serves at Monmouth, and then, as I'll mention later, is later captured at Charleston in the Second Siege of Charleston. From his wounds at Brandywine, he comes back and recovers and ends up being in charge of the Virginia forces that will then be asked to go down to reinforce Charleston with the threat of that being taken by the British. The lieutenants, excuse me, I'm sorry, that was the commanders. The lieutenants, and not as in the rank of lieutenant, but the seconds in command or the prime subordinates. Charles Scott was his second in command, lieutenant colonel at the time, and then Lieutenant Colonel Edward Stevens. That is not a picture of Lieutenant Colonel Edward Stevens. That's a picture of what would be his boss later on, Gates, General Gates. So I wouldn't want to, for Edward Stevens to think that we've misrepresented him, but there is no portrait that I could find of that gentleman. Both gentlemen served with throughout the war. Stevens, who's commander of the Culpeper Minutemen at the Battle of Great Bridge, becomes and is appointed colonel of the 10th Virginia. He fights also at Brandywine and Germantown. He's promoted to brigadier general, and it commands the Virginia militia. And he does so at Camden with Gates, the picture there, and up at Guilford Courthouse. He's wounded at Guilford Courthouse and comes home to recover. And an interesting note here is when Bannister Tarleton of the British come up with their raid into Virginia in 1781, he almost captures Edward Stevens, but John Jewett, or Jack Jewett, depending how you like to count his name, in addition to warning Thomas Jefferson, goes to Stevens' house to make sure that he's free of being, or at least out of harm's way, with Bannister Tarleton coming through the area. After that, though, he comes back and he does assist Thomas Nelson at Yorktown as they manage the efforts of the Virginia militia. Now, Charles Scott, the gentleman on your right, quite a colorful character. He lives to the ripe old age of 74. He's 41 at the Battle of Great Bridge, a couple of years junior to Woodford. And during the winter's over that winter with the Virginia Regiment, but then in August of 76 is appointed as colonel. It takes the 5th Virginia and is involved with the crossing at Trenton in 76, becomes brigadier general in 77, and also serves at Brandywine. and Germantown, and then winters over at Valley Forge. He plays a crucial part in Monmouth, where he covers the retreat in that battle and was recognized for that. He also then comes back to Virginia and helps to defend Virginia against the Collier-Matthew raids in the spring of '79. And then, along with Colonel Woodford, is asked to get as many Virginians as possible to go down to reinforce the fortress at Charleston, so the British can't take it. Now, that didn't work out well. They took the force down there. It was delayed in showing up. And as the day they arrive is the day that the British take Charleston. They both become POWs. Charles Scott is given parole. I'm not too sure why he's handled differently, because Woodford ends up being taken prisoner and placed on a prison ship. What's interesting about Charles Scott is after the war, he goes to the West and starts to settle down and is involved with politics there, and becomes the 4th governor of Kentucky. From lieutenants to the fighters, I'll identify 2, one with a short biography, Billy Flora, but he was identified as a hero of the battle, a free black man that had come to the Patriot defense, and he was 19 at the battle and showed great courage in the face of the Grenadiers. He was one of those advanced scouts. He serves throughout the war at Brandywine, Germantown, Monmouth. He does go to Charleston with the others, but is not caught, and then ends his career at Yorktown. He is retired from the service and does receive a pension. With that pension, he creates and owns then a freight company and a livery stable. He became a very fortunate man, residing primarily in Portsmouth. Unfortunately, we cannot find a marker for him there of where he was laid to rest. Marshall, on the other hand, that's a whole nother evening to spend with you all and talking about Marshall. But he was only a year older than Billy Flora when at the Battle of Great Bridge. He was the oldest son of Tom Marshall, who was the executive officer for the Culpeper Minutemen down there with Colonel Stevens. During the course of his service, he serves both at Great Bridge with the Culpeper Minutemen, not with the Virginia Regiment per se, goes on to Brandywine and Valley Forge, and then in 1780, comes back and goes to the school, reads for the law at William and Mary, becomes a Virginia delegate, an emissary to France under President Adams during the XYZ affair, a Virginia representative, the 4th Secretary of State, and then most importantly, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the longest serving one, having served for 34 years, having rendered over 500 opinions, and the most notable and most recently and the most important being Marbury versus Madison and the establishment of judicial review. But it's not just the people. I would be remiss if I didn't include the village in the epilogue, as much as the Great Bridge survived with the, survived the battle. The British did come back. And so I have the map that was on your left, which is 1775, which is what Captain Samuel Leslie would have used as he tries to plan out his efforts in Great Bridge, and the one in 1780, which was for Lieutenant Colonel John Simcoe of the American Rangers, meaning British unit made of American loyalists. as they attempted to reestablish a foothold in Portsmouth. This is after Benedict Arnold has made the raid on Richmond. He establishes a headquarters in Portsmouth and tries to secure the southeast side of the river, which continues to be a problem. And to do that, he feels he needs to establish a base at Great Bridge. He doesn't go back to the old stockade fort because it was ruined. So he tries to establish what you see here, a star fort, a classic star fort on the south side of the river. To do so, though, he basically disassembles the entire town to use those materials in creating his star fort. We can, in the process of bringing the canal in years later, there's annotation that when they cut through this area, which is where the canal comes through, they did see the difference of composition in the soil to verify that in fact had gotten established. It was not used, though. By the time it was finished, Cornwallis had made it up from the south, and they decided, I don't want to use that, don't need it. So when people say, where are all the colonial buildings in Great Bridge? Well, they were part of a fort that was never used, and probably the rest of the village was burnt. One last item on the epilogue is the Martyr, and I pull William Woodford in for this. I could perhaps also pull in Charles Fordyce, although in one of the accounts, someone said he would have been a martyr, except if it had been for a better cause. But William Woodford, once captured at Charleston, was brought back to New York, to the headquarters, and was put aboard a prison ship or a prison hulk. And you see an example of that, not the ship, but what they would use. Old ships that were decommissioned that could be used to hold prisoners. Terrible conditions. He spends about 6 weeks on board the prison ship, and on November 19th dies. Legend has it is that he's buried in Trinity Courtyard, or Trinity, by the Trinity Church. Although I have gone up there and looked at every grave marker and I can't find his. He's not even on the list over at the Martyrs Memorial in Brooklyn, where they've constructed this monument to the over 10,000 prisoners who died aboard prison ships that often are forgotten as some of the costs to this war. But as much as that is a bit of a morbid end to our discussion, I would like to just point out that remember, his second in command went to Kentucky, and Kentucky was torn out of what the greater Virginians would have liked to have seen as Virginia. One of the counties in Western Virginia was named for Colonel Woodford, and it was Woodford County. Well, one of the 9 remaining distilleries in Kentucky is Woodford Reserve. And so the next time you think of liberty or the sacrifice of Colonel Woodford, raise a little toast for him and get a sip of Woodford Reserve. You'll be remembering of what took place here at Great Bridge. Now, trying to remember and preserve history is always a challenge. And that's what our job is at the Great Bridge Battlefield and Waterways Museum. The foundation that backs it was established in 1999. And the anniversary is tomorrow, on the day of the battle. Our mission is basically to protect, preserve, and promote the history of the Battle of Great Bridge that took place on December 9th in 1775, along with the region's Revolutionary War history and the history of canal building in our region, both to educate the public and to illustrate the importance of these events. Because you can certainly argue, and it has been argued more and more, that because of the outcome of the Battle of Great Bridge, Virginia then walked toward independence and not just for self-defense. A lot of volunteers have moved to try to preserve artifacts that have been found there on South Island. Of course, this took place in 2003, especially as they started to dig new embankments for what would be the new bridge at Great Bridge to cross the canal. In so doing, they started to, in the debris that was pulled up, they started to get large planks. And this is, if you come to the museum, this is hardly a plank, but that's a large log. It's been date tested back to the 1700s. That was likely a shoulder of the causeway, as well as other artifacts such as pottery or tea filters, as you see here. We have them on display, all that were found there at South Island. It is in the middle of the historic park, a park that has recently been expanded by at least a half an acre, right close to the battlefield. You'll notice it as you're coming down Battlefield Boulevard, if for no other reason. If you look off, if you're traveling south, look to your left, and you will see the monument there, and behind it the memorial. We have a number of points to look out over the original, where the original area might have looked like in the 1700s. It's beautifully located right on the Intercoastal Canal. You can see the building there. They did a marvelous job with that. Please talk to anybody that's been there. I think Peggy will be the first to endorse the fact that they've done a lovely job. What I'll try to do is give you a little bit of a virtual tour, just to tease you along the way. But in that area, as well as the historic park, there are hiking trails, overlooks on the southern branch of the Elizabeth River and the marshlands that are around. The building itself was completed in December of 2018, but then it took another 2 years to get the exhibits done. And thanks to Peggy, she helped us out in getting some of the exhibits squared away as we were getting ready to display things. It's a beautiful building. As much as it was completed in March of 2020, our exhibits weren't ready until the exhibits were ready March 2020, but because of the pandemic, we were unable to open to the public until June 19th. But ever since then, we have been open. We are open Wednesday through Saturday, 10 to 4. And on the second Sunday of the month, 1 to 4. That's our lobby. As you walk in, we break the story of Great Bridge into 8 galleries, and both on the colonial side, then on to the history of the Dismal Swamp and Albemarle and Chesapeake canals. Once you leave the 3-Ton Tavern where I am, you'll be on the road to war, timeline that talks about the events that lead to the war, and then the battle theater that puts you in the middle of the war. If you make it out all right, we don't have to tape you up with many bandages. Then we talk about the aftermath, as you see here, on the other things that took place in the war after the Battle of Great Bridge, the burning of Norfolk, and subsequent activity in Virginia. Like I mentioned, in addition to the Dismal Swamp and Albemarle and Chesapeake canals, we have a Corps of Engineer display or gallery where we have set up an old operating panel from the previous bridge to see if folks can get a sense for what it would be like to be a bridge operator and to manage that kind of transportation. We do entertain school groups. We haven't had it recently, but we do expect some once the pandemic has lifted. We have had, as you see up in the upper left, up to 200 kids there at one time. That was a busy day. We've done that a few times. But it's lifelong learning. Any group can come down, senior citizens, military groups, faculty, just for the enrichment opportunity. We encourage them to come. We have special events throughout the year. Of course, they were pretty much suspended during COVID, but as you can see here, we've got wine tasting. We hope to have that again in February. We just completed a ghost tour again. Letters of Santa, Christmas past and present, will also be going on this December. And we do hope there's a return to the beer fest. At least I do. The facility can be rented, but we don't rent it right now. It can hold up to 150, but again, because of the current restrictions, it's difficult to have large events there. We do have a gift shop, and that's what gets Peggy excited. And we encourage her to come down, bring your friends, spend your money as much as you like. Christmas is coming, so get some nice colonial gifts for folks. If you want to be involved, please, first of all, visit the museum. Come on, take a look, take a side trip, get out of the house, become a member of the foundation if you'd like, volunteer, attend any of the events that we see, and just spread the word, get it out there. If you just have nothing else to do with your required minimum distributions, well, talk to Elizabeth Goodwin. She'd probably be happy to have you sponsor something larger. It's been great talking to you. I hope I haven't bored you to tears. It's a little more challenging virtually, but we certainly hope you have a great holiday season, a Merry Christmas, and come on down, visit the museum. I'll take any questions if people have any.
Don't see any questions in the chat feature.
Okay.
But I do want to thank you for including the gift shop in your presentation. Just kidding. I apologize, everyone. For some reason, neither my phone nor my laptop would connect with Zoom, even though they were working just fine earlier. I do see one question now. When we see Great Bridge today, we see the Chesapeake and Albemarle Canal and the locks. What was the river like at the time of the battle? How has it changed? Did the Elizabeth River just peter out, or did it connect to the North Landing River? I know the name of the foundation is the Great Bridge Battlefield and Waterways History Foundation. So, John, could you talk a little bit about the waterways?
Certainly. The river is pretty much still as it's been, with the exception is right where the bridge crosses the river, there's a tighter culvert. So it backs the water up on the east side more so than perhaps would have been the case then. It does not connect the head of the river, or again, it's a tidal estuary, so it ends about where the bypass is. I've taken a canoe up to that point, and then it's just mud. That thought about connecting to the other waterways was in their thoughts then. In 1774, the House of Burgesses, when it was still in existence, with the approval of Governor Dunmore, did approve the building of a canal. And they were wondering whether to take it from the eastern branch down to the Black or North River, or from the southern branch. And they had decided that they would do it from the southern branch. But due to circumstances that they had not anticipated, there was no canal building going on for the next few years. And actually, it didn't start to take place until the 1850s, at least for the Albemarle and Chesapeake. And that was completed in 1859. It's probably just as well because it required steam power, where the Dismal Swamp was dug with enslaved labor. It was too much for that particular route. I think because of the entanglement of the cypress roots, for some reason, it was more difficult there than it was in the Dismal Swamp. But that's, I don't know if that answers your question, but that's some of the background on the various waterways. They had always planned to do that. The big goal was to connect the two watersheds of the Chesapeake Bay and the Carolina Sounds. And in lieu of doing the canal, then you would take your goods to Great Bridge, offload them, put them on a cart or wagon, take them 10 miles down on the Great Road to North Carolina at a point where the Northwest River crosses Battlefield Boulevard, transload them again onto flats and barges, and then down into the Carolinas. So that's why Great Bridge ends up being so important, that, and it's the only land route to get to Norfolk if you're not inside that.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank you especially, John, for thinking on your feet when I couldn't get in earlier. John is a retired Marine and educator, and I think that's where he may have learned to think on his feet. He is, after retirement, he started working as a docent for the Great Bridge Battlefield and Waterways History Foundation. He's now the president of the foundation and put a lot of work into the form and content of the museum at the Visitor Center at Great Bridge. For those of you who have enjoyed our little mini tours that the Norfolk Historical Society has hosted previous to the pandemic, we are planning to take a trip down to Great Bridge, maybe when the weather gets a little bit warmer, and John will take us around the museum and also the outside of the building where the battle actually took place, and show us some of the high points of that. It's wonderful and well worth a trip. So watch for more information about that. And John is sitting there in background as a recreation of the tavern inside the museum. So thank you so much, John.
You're welcome. I'll leave with one last thing is, don't forget old Woodford and
I
a
was
toast to
wondering what you
those
were
who stood
holding
for
there.
liberty.
Okay. Cheers.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And I hope you all have a wonderful holiday. I hope to see you again on January 12th for our first program of the new year. We do plan to be back in person one of these days. We'll keep you posted on that. A lot of it depends on the availability of the theater at the MacArthur Memorial, and some of that, of course, is dependent on the pandemic. So bear with us. I appreciate your support, and we will be back in person one of these days. In the meantime, we'll have another great program like the one tonight next month. So have a good holiday, y'all. Stay safe, stay well, and good night.